Hey guys, today is Sunday, and that means it's Ghost Stories Day, so I'll be reading from a book on Scottish ghost stories. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks, find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, happy Sunday, everybody. Happy Mother's Day to folks in the States. Give me 1 second, you guys. I want to check my mics to make sure everything's hooked right. I forgot to do that. I got in here really fast. My old dog was having issues today, so I've been working with him. And so I had switched some settings last night. I want to make sure I'm off those settings. So just give me 1 second to get going here. I apologize. So speakers, okay. We're just making sure that I'm on the correct mic for you guys. Okay, here we go. And we are, so off we go. Hey guys, welcome to California Haunts Radio. It's Sunday, and that means it's reading day, and this is the day where we kind of get involved in starting out the work week, right? I mean, everybody has to, well, most people, are starting work tomorrow, and this is a way to kind of unwind and maybe, depending on where you're at, if you're on the East Coast, you might be having dinner, or you might be settling down for the night because it's past 9 p.m. Pacific. Or if you're on the West Coast, 6:30 p.m. or 6 p.m. Pacific is dinner time. So this is a way to kind of slide into the work week by reading ghost stories, and this is something we do every day. Tonight we are broadcasting on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok. Welcome. Just a quick warning to everybody over on TikTok who might be joining. I can barely read your comments, my little tiny cell phone. So when I get my new cell phone, maybe I'll be able to read your comments better. But be rest assured, I know you're there. And what we're going to do is once I get my intro done, and, introductions and all that, I'm going to be reading for about an hour. And we do this every Sunday, and it's something people like. And the book I'm reading from is Scottish Ghost Stories, and it was written in the 1800s, so it is out of copyright. So it's in public domain, so I can't get in trouble for anything like that. So just bear that in mind. Also, there's stuff in here that may not be up to date and woke, stuff that might offend you. Please don't contact the Facebook or TikTok police or anything like that, because that's just how the book is. If I'm able to catch them as I'm reading, you'll hear me pause, and then I'll change the wording. I have to double check something really quick because you know what? I just heard my mic do something and it shouldn't have done that. So hang on. Give me 1 second. I may have to come back in, but I gotta check my mic settings. Just give me a second. Something's not right. I keep hearing things on my mic, so let me double check that over here. I'm having nothing but issues. Okay, we're still connected. So, somebody might be calling me. I don't know what the beeping is. I'm hearing it in my mic. So hopefully it settles down. So, okay. Anyway, sorry about that. I don't know what this beeping sound is I'm hearing in my headset, because usually that means the mic is off. So I guess we're just going to have to wing it. Anyway, my name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal problem, we can help you. And not only that, we're in Oregon, Washington, and Nevada, so we have people out there as well. It might take us a while to get to you because all those states are really huge, but we do have psychics on staff who could call you, and if it is something paranormal, they can not come out to your place, but they can calm things down at your location until we can get out there, which usually doesn't take more than 2 or 3 days. Okay. If you're watching from Facebook today, if you're watching from YouTube today, if you're watching from TikTok today, please let us know. If you haven't signed up to follow us already on Facebook, please feel free to do so. We do this show where I read from a ghost book. all the way through. We're on the air Sunday through Friday. Everything Monday through Friday is all paranormal, or most of it's more paranormal oriented, different stories, UFOs, cryptids, things like that. We follow that, and that's California Haunts Radio. And for you guys over on TikTok, that I don't have a TikTok for to be able to do this, it's youtube.com/at California Haunts Radio every night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Like I said, I can see you guys on there. I can see your comments, but I cannot read them. Okay, old eyes, blind bat, all that good stuff. So, if you look in, if you're Facebook, you like what you see, please feel free to follow, hit that follow button, and show me some love. Give me some thumbs up, give me some happy faces, things like that. These hand heart things I can never do. And also, chat in the chat room amongst yourselves. Same thing with TikTok. Please chat in the chat room. What happened last week is we got through the whole show, and everybody got real quiet because they were listening, and TikTok kicked me off for it. Then I had to come back in. So let's try and keep some kind of activity going. Whether it's you guys talking amongst yourselves in the chat room, or you're double tapping that screen to show me some love. YouTube, same thing. There's more than 900 videos sitting at YouTube, all of this show, all different topics. If you could help me out with a like here and there or subscribe, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it. TikTok, double tap that screen. So I'm looking for 1,000 likes today, so double tap that screen. Also, all this is self-funded, so if you could help me out a little bit, I appreciate it. You're not required to. I do have a goal of 100 night helms. Okay, if you could help me out, even with 2 or 3 of them, I'd be really happy. But I am shooting for 1,000 likes up on TikTok, so please double tap that screen. Double tap that screen. Anyway, we're going to continue with our Scottish ghost stories today. And looks like we're going to get through today. We should get through part of next week, and then we'll be switching books over to the werewolf book. So we've got enough to get through today, so we're going to be reading. And once I start reading, like I said, I will read for about an hour. So if you guys are into ghost stories, you're in the right spot. That's what California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team is. California Haunts Radio. It's all about ghosts and goblins and all that, things that go bump in the night. So I will be reading for at least an hour today, and so join me, and I hope you enjoy it. Sit back if you're at home and dim the lights down, put on some slippers, or sit in front of the fire, do whatever it is you do in the evenings. Have your dinner, have a snack, and just sit back, and I will read to you from Scottish Ghost Stories. Okay. And thank you for the likes. I'm trying to hit 1,000 likes. If you can double tap that screen, double tap. Same thing over everywhere else. Give me a thumbs up or happy face. All right. Again, my name is Charlotte. I'll be your host for the next hour or so. Let me grab my tablet, and away we go. There we go. Okay. So this is case XIII. I don't do Greek. Or Roman numerals here. Okay, case XIII. The floating head of the Benratchet Inn near the Perth Road in Dundee, Scotland. So here we are. I do have an old chair, so bear with me. But please double tap that screen. If you're into ghost stories, this is the place to be. Some years ago, when I was engaged in collecting cases for a book I contemplated publishing on haunted houses in England and Wales, I was introduced to an Irish clergyman whose name I'd forgotten, and whom I've never met since. Had the incident taken place in England or Wales, I should have noted it down carefully, but as it occurred in Scotland, and I had no intention then of bringing out a volume on Scottish phantasms, I did not do so. My memory, however, I can assure my readers, in spite of the many ghost tales committed to it, for scarcely a day passes that I do not hear one, seldom fails, and the Irish clergyman's story, which I'm about to relate, comes back to me now with startling vividness. One summer evening, early in the 80s, Mr. Murphy, the name by which I will designate the originator of this story, and his wife arrived in Dundee. The town was utterly unknown to them, and they were touring Scotland for the first time. Not knowing where to put up for the night, and knowing no one to whom they could apply for information, they consulted a local paper, and from the long list of hotels and boarding houses advertised therein, selected the Benratchet Inn near the Perth Road. You'll laugh because when I try to pronounce these things too, I'm not making fun of anybody. It's just me. Near the Perth Road as being one of the most likely to meet their modest requirements. They were certainly not disappointed with the exterior of the hotel they had chosen, for as soon as they saw it, they exclaimed at the same time, "What a delightful old place!" And old it certainly was, for the many garbled oaken structure and projecting windows unquestionably indicated the 16th century, whilst, to enhance the effect and give it a true touch and detail of ye ancient times, a huge antique lantern was hung over the entrance. Nor did the interior impress them less favorably. The rooms were large and low, the ceilings, walls, floors, and staircase all of oak. The diamond lattice windows and narrow, tortuous passages, and innumerable nooks and crannies, and cupboards created an atmosphere of combined quaintness and comfort that irresistibly appealed to the Murphys. Viewed under the searching rays of the sun, and cheered by the voices of the visitors, the interior of the house, for artistic taste and cheerfulness, would indeed be hard to beat. But as Mrs. Murphy's eyes wandered up the stairs and down the corridors, she was filled with misgivings as to how the place would strike her at night. Though not nervous naturally, and by no means superstitious at night, when the house was dark and silent, and the moon called forth the shadows, she was not without that feeling of uneasiness which most people, even avowed skeptics, experience when passing the night in strange and novel quarters. The room they engaged, I cannot say selected, as, the hotel being full, they had Hobson's choice, was at the end of a very long passage, at the back of the house and overlooking the yard. It was a large apartment, and in one of its several recesses stood the bed, a gigantic ebony four-poster with spotlessly clean valance, and, what was even greater importance, well-aired sheets. That's how well-aired sheets. The other furniture in the room, being of the same sort as that in the majority of the old-fashioned hostels, needs no description, but a fixture in the shape of a cupboard, a deep, dark cupboard, let into the wall facing the bed, instantly attracted Mrs. Murphy's attention. There is always something interesting in cupboards, particularly old and roomy cupboards, when it is nighttime and no one is about to get into bed. Right, okay. It is then that they suggest all manner of fascinating possibilities. It was to this cupboard, then, that Mrs. Murphy paid the greatest attention, before commencing to undress prior to getting into bed. She poked about in it for some moments, and then, apparently satisfied that no one was hidden there, continued her investigation of the room. Mr. Murphy did not assist. He pleaded fatigue, and sat on the corner of the bed munching a gingerbread and reading the Dundee Advertiser till the operation was over. Now I want gingerbread. He then helped Mrs. Murphy unpack their stuff, and during the process, whilst away so much of the time in conversation, that they were both startled when a clock from some adjacent church solemnly boomed 12. They were then seized with something approaching a panic, and hastened to disrobe. "I wish I had a nightlight, John," Mrs. Murphy said, as she got up from her prayers. "I suppose it wouldn't do to keep one of the candles burning. I am not exactly afraid, only I don't fancy being left in the dark. I had a curious sensation when I was in the cupboard just now, and I can't exactly explain it. But I feel now that I would like the light left burning." "It certainly is rather a gloomy room," Mr. Murphy remarked, raising his eyes to the black oak ceiling and then allowing them to dwell in turn on each of the angles and recesses. "And I agree with you. It would be nice if we had a nightlight, or, better still, gas. But as we haven't, my dear, and we shall be on our feet a good deal tomorrow, I think we ought to try and get some sleep as soon as possible." He blew out the candle as he spoke, and quickly scrambled into bed. A long hush followed, broken only by the sound of breathing, and an occasional ticking, as some long-legged creature on the wall and with window blind. Mrs. Murphy could never remember if she actually went to sleep, but she is sure her husband did, as she distinctly heard him snore. And the sound, so detestable to her as a rule, was so welcome to her then. She was lying listening to it, and wishing with all her soul that she could go to sleep, when she suddenly became aware of a smell, a most offensive, pungent odor, that blew across the room and crept up her nostrils. The cold perspiration of fear at once broke out on her forehead. Nasty as the smell was, it suggested something more horrible, something she dared not attempt to analyze. She thought several times of rousing her husband, but, remembering how tired he'd been, she desisted, and, with all her faculties abnormally on the alert, she lay awake and listened. A death-like hush hung over the house, interrupted at intervals by the surreptitious noises peculiar to the night. Enigmatical creaks, Footsteps, rustlings, the drapery, sighs, and whisperings, all very faint, all very subtle, and all possibly, just possibly, attributed to natural causes. Mrs. Murphy caught herself. Why? She could not say, waiting for some definite auditory manifestation of what she instinctively felt was near at hand. At present, however, she could not locate it. She could only speculate on its whereabouts. It was somewhere in the direction of the cupboard. And each time the stench came to her, the conviction that its origin was in the cupboard grew. At last, unable to sustain the suspense any longer, and urged on by an irresistible fascination, she got softly out of bed and, creeping stealthily forward, found her way with surprisingly little difficulty, considering it was pitch dark, and the room was unfamiliar to her, to the cupboard. With every step she took, the stink increased, and by the time she had reached the cupboard, she was almost suffocated. For some seconds, she toyed irresolutely with the door handle, longing to be back again in bed, but unable to tear herself away from the cupboard. At last, yielding to the demands of some piteously exacting unknown influence, she held her breath and swung open the door. The moment she did so, the room filled with the faint, phosphorescent glow of decay, as she saw, exactly opposite her, a head, a human head, floating in midair. Petrified with terror, she lost every atom of strength, and entirely bereft of power to move or articulate a sound, she stood stock still, staring at it. That it was the head of a man, she could only guess from the matted crop of short red hair that fell in a disordered entanglement over the upper part of the forehead and ears. All else was lost in a loathsome, disgusting mass of detestable decomposition, too utterly vile and foul to describe. While the abnormal thing beginning to move forward, the spell that bound Mrs. Murphy to the floor was broken, and, with a cry of horror, she fled to the bed and awoke her husband. The head was by this time close to them, and had not Mrs. Murphy dragged her husband forcibly out of its way, it would have touched him. His terror was even greater than hers, but for the moment neither could speak. They stood clutching one another in an awful silence. Mrs. Murphy at length gasped out, "Pray, John, pray. Command the thing in the name of God to depart." Mr. Murphy made a desperate effort to do so, but not a syllable would come. The head now veered round, it was moving swiftly towards them, its awful stench causing them both to retch and vomit. Mr. Murphy, seizing his stick, lashed at it with all his might. The result was one they might well have expected. The stick met with no resistance, and the head continued to advance. Both Mr. and Mrs. Murphy then made a frantic attempt to find the door, the head still pursuing them, and, tripping over something, in their wild haste, fell together on the floor. There was now no hope. The head had caught up to them. It hovered immediately above them, and, descending lower, lower, and lower, finally passed right through them, through the floor and out of sight. It was long ere either of them could sufficiently recover to stir from the floor, and when they did move, it was only to totter to their bed, and to lie with the bedclothes well over their heads, quivering and quaking till the morning. The hot morning sun dissipating their fears, they got up, and hurrying downstairs, demanded an interview with their landlord. It was in vain the latter argued it was all a nightmare. They showed the absurdity of such a theory by pushingly attesting that they had both simultaneously experienced the phenomena. They were about to take their departure when the landlord retracted all he had said, offered them another room, at any terms they liked, if only they would stay and hold their tongues. "I know every word of what you say is true," he said, in such submissive tones that the tender hearts of Mr. and Mrs. Murphy instantly relented, and they promised to remain. "But what am I to do? I cannot shut up a house which I have taken on as 20 years' lease, because one room in it has haunted, and, after all, there is only one visitor in 20 who is disturbed by the apparition." "What is the history of the head?" "Why, it is said to be that of a peddler who was murdered here over 100 years ago. The body was hidden behind the wainscoting, and his head under the cupboard floor. The miscreants were never caught. They are supposed to have gone down in a ship that sailed from this port just about that time and was never heard of again. This is the gist of the story. the clergyman told me, and, believing it, as I now undoubtedly do, to be true, there is every reason to suppose that the inn, to which I have, of course, given a fictitious name, if still in existence, is still haunted. Now, the stories in this book, some of them may be true, some may be not. The gentleman that writes the book, O'Donnell, he is a ghost investigator from the 1800s. So that's what kind of keeps it cool. If you like what you're hearing, TikTok, please double tap that screen. Double tap that screen. I see there's people in the chat room over on StreamYard over here. Let me pop right in there. Hello, Marisa. How we doing? And so we shall continue with the next chapter. Again, I don't do Roman numerals, so it's case XIV. The hauntings of House in the neighborhood of the Great Webster North Road, Aberdeen. They usually don't say the name of the house for fear of, people not buying it or whatever. So it's always shut down like that. Please double tap that screen. Double tap that screen. We're going for 1,000 likes. If you like this, we do this every Sunday. So here we go. The following experience of a haunting is that of Mr. Scarf, who told it to me some few summers ago, expressing at the same time great eagerness to accompany me on some of my investigations. I append it as nearly as possible in his own words. I was spending Easter, he began, with some friends of mine in Aberdeen, and learning from them that there was a haunted house in the immediate vicinity of the Great Western Road, I begged them to try to get me permission to spend a night in it. As good luck would have it, the landlord happened to be a connection of theirs, and although at first rather reluctant to give me leave, lest by doing so he should create a precedent, and, consequently, be pestered to death by people whom he knew to be as anxious as I was to see the ghost, he eventually yielded, and the following evening, at 8 p.m., accompanied only by my dog, Scott, I entered the premises. I cannot say I felt very comfortable when the door slammed behind me, and I found myself standing alone in a cold, dark passage out of which rose a gloomy staircase, suggestive of all sorts of uncanny possibilities. However, overcoming these marvelous apprehensions as best as I could, I began a thorough search of the premises to make sure that no one was hiding there. Descending first of all into the basement, I explored the kitchen, scullery, larder, and other domestic offices. The place fairly reeked with damp, but this was not to be wondered at. Taking in consideration the fact that the soil was clay, the floor of the very poorest quality of cement, cracked and broken in 101 places, and that there had been no fires in any of the rooms for many months. Here and there, in the darkest corners, were clusters of ugly cockroaches, whilst more than one monstrous rat scampered away on my approach. My dog, or rather the dog that was lent me, and which went by the name of Scott, kept close at my heel, showing no very great enthusiasm in his mission, and giving even the rodents as wide a berth as possible. I invariably trust to my psychic faculty. As you know, Mr. O'Donnell, some people are born with psychic abilities, to enable me to detect the presence of the superphysical. I generally feel the latter incorporated in some inexplicable manner in the ether, or see it in interwoven shadows. Here in the basement, it was everywhere. The air was simply saturated with it, and as the fading sunlight called shadow after shadow into existence, it confronted me enigmatically whichever way I turned. I went upstairs, and their presence followed me. In one or two of the top bedrooms, more particularly in a tiny garret overlooking the backyard, the presence seemed inclined to hover. For some seconds I waited there, in order to see if there would be any further development, there being none. I obeyed the mandates of a sudden impulse, and made my way once more to the basement. On arriving at the top of the kitchen stairs, Scott showed a decided hesitation to descend farther. Crouching down, he whined piteously, and when I attempted to grasp him by the collar, snarled in a most savage manner. Consequently, thinking it better to have no companion at all than one so unwilling, I descended without him. The stairs terminated in a very dark and narrow passage, into which the doors of the kitchen, larder, storeroom, etc., opened respectively, and at the farther extremity of which was a doorway leading to the backyard. The superphysical presence seeming to be more pronounced in this passage than anywhere else, I decided to spend the night in it, and, selecting a spot opposite the entrance to the scullery, I constructed a seat out of two of the drawers of the kitchen dresser by placing them one on the other, bottom uppermost on the floor. It was now 9:30. The traffic in the street overhead was beginning to diminish. The rumbling of the drays and heavy four-wheelers had almost ceased, whilst the jingling of hansoms and even the piercing hoot-hoot and loud burr-burr of motors was fast becoming less and less frequent. I put out my candle and waited, and as I waited, the hush and gloom of the house deepened and intensified until by midnight all around me was black and silent, black with a blackness that defies penetration, and silent with the silence that challenges only the rivalry of the grave. Occasionally, I heard sounds, such, for example, as the creaking of a board, the flopping of a cockroach, and then the growling of Scott, sounds which in the daytime would have been too trivial to attract attention, but which now assumed the most startling and exaggerated proportions. From time to time, I felt my pulse, and I took my temperature to make sure that I was perfectly normal, whilst at 1 o'clock, the hour when human vitality begins to be on the wane, I ate some chicken and ham sandwiches, which I helped down with a single glass of oatmeal stout. So far, beyond my feeling that there was a superphysical something in the house, nothing had occurred. There had not been the slightest attempt at manifestation, and, as the minutes sped swiftly by, I began to fear that perhaps, after all the hauntings were only a negative nature. As the clock struck 2, however, Scott gave an extra savage snarl, and the next moment came racing downstairs. Darting along the passage and tearing towards me, he scrambled up the overturned drawers, and, burying his face in my lap, set up the most piteous whinings. A sensation of icy coldness, such as could not have been due to any physical cause, now surged through me, and, as I got out my pocket flashlight, ready for emergencies, I heard an unmistakable rustling in the cellar opposite. At once, my whole attention became riveted in the direction of the sound, and, as I sat gazing fixedly in front of me, the darkness was suddenly dissipated, and the whole passage from one end to the other was illuminated by a phosphorescent glow, which glow I can best describe as bearing a close resemblance, in kind, though not in degree, to the glow of a glowworm. I then saw the scullery door slowly begin to open. A hideous fear seized me. What in the name of heaven should I see? Transfixed with terror, unable to move or utter a sound, I crouched against the wall, paralyzed and helpless, whilst the door opened wider and wider. At last, after an interval which to me was an eternity, something, as yet indefinite shadowy, something, loomed in the background of the enlarging space. My suspense was now sublime, and I felt that another second or so of such tension would assuredly see me swoon. The shadowy something, however, quickly developed, and in less time than it takes to write, as assumed the form of a woman, a middle-aged woman with a startlingly white face, straight nose, and curiously lined mouth, the two front upper teeth of which projected considerably and were very long. Her hair was black, her hands coarse and red, and she was clad in the orthodox shabby print of a general servant in some middle-class family. The expression in her wide, open, glassy blue eyes, as they glared into mine, was one of such intense mental and physical agony that I felt every atom of blood in my veins congeal. Creeping stealthily forward, her gaze still on me, she emerged from the doorway, and motioning me to follow, glided up the staircase. Up we went, the cold gray dawn greeting us on our way. Entering the garret, to which I have already alluded, the phantasm noiselessly approached the hearth, and, pointing downward with a violent motion of the index finger of its right hand, suddenly vanished. A great feeling of relief now came over me, and, yielding to a reaction which was the inevitable consequence of such a severe nervous strain, I reeled against the window sill and shook with laughter. Equanimity at length reasserting itself, I carefully marked the spot on the floor indicated by the apparition, and, descending into the basement to fetch Scott, made hurried tracks to my friend's house, where I was allowed to sleep on till late in the day. I then returned to the haunted house with the landlord and my friend, and on raising the boarding in a garret, we discovered a stamped and addressed envelope. As the result of our combined inquiries, we learned that a few years previously, the house had been occupied by some tradespeople of the name of Piblington, who, some 6 or 7 months before they left the house, had had in their employment a servant named Anna Webb. This servant, the description of whose person corresponded in every way with the ghost I had seen, had been suspected of stealing a letter containing money, and had hanged herself in the cellar. Again, 1800s, unalived herself, however you want to call it. Okay. The letter, I gathered with several others, had been given to Anna to post by Mrs. Piblington, and as no reply to the one containing money was received, Anna was closely questioned. Naturally nervous and highly strung, the Inquisition confused her terribly, and her embarrassment being construed into guilt, she was threatened with prosecution. As a proof of my innocence, she scribbled on a piece of paper, which was produced at the subsequent inquest. I am going to unalive myself. I never stole your letter, and can only suppose it was lost in the post. The mere fact of the accused unaliving herself would, in many people's opinion, point to a guilt. And as the postal order was never traced, it was generally concluded that Anna had secreted it and had been only waiting till inquiry ceased, and the affair was forgotten to cash it. Of course, the letter I found was the missing one, and, although apparently hidden with intent, the fact of its never having been opened seemed to suggest that Anna was innocent, and that the envelope had, by some extraordinary accident, fallen unnoticed by Anna through the crack between the boards. Anyhow, its discovery put an end to the disturbances, and the apparition of the unfortunate unaliver, whether guilty or innocent, and the judgment day, can alone determine. That has never been seen since. Okay. Rolling right along. I'm going to have a little sip of water here because it's warm. Please double tap that screen. Please comment, double tap that screen. Okay, we got a like over there. So please, over on TikTok, please feel free to comment, double tap that screen. Let TikTok know we're still alive. Because like I said, we got down to the last 5 minutes last week, and because everybody was like just kind of hanging out listening, TikTok thought we were too idle and they cut us off. So let's not go there this week. Okay, more Roman numerals for me to deal with. Case XV, the White Lady of Rona Avenue near Sterling. Okay, so it's the White Lady of Rowan Avenue near Sterling. Like most European countries, Scotland claims its share of phantasms in the form of white ladies. According to Mr. Ingram and his haunted houses and family legends, the ruins of the mansion of Woodhousley are haunted by a woman in white, presumably, though personally I think otherwise. The ghost of Lady Hamilton of Bothwell Hall, H-A-U-G-H, Howe. This unfortunate lady, together with her baby, was during the temporary absence of her husband. She was stripped naked and turned out of doors on a bitterly cold night by a favorite of the Regent Murray. As a result of this inhuman conduct, the child unalived, and its mother, with the corpse in her arms, was discovered in the morning raving mad. Another instance of this particular form of apparition is to be found in Sir Walter Scott's White Lady of Avenel. And there are endless others, both in reality and fiction. Some years ago, when I was putting up at a friend's house in Edinburgh, I was introduced to a man who had had several experiences with ghosts and had, therefore, been especially asked to meet me. After we had talked together for some time, he related the following adventure which had befallen him in his childhood in Ronham. Oh, there we go, Ronham. I was always a lover of nature, he began, and my earliest reminiscences are associated with solitary rambles through the fields, dales, and copses surrounding my home. I lived within a stone's throw of the property of old Sir E.C., who has long gone to rest. God bless his soul. And I think it needs blessing, For if there was any truth in local gossip, and it is said, I think truly that there is never any smoke without fire, he had lived a very queer life. Indeed, he was held in such universal awe and abhorrence that we used to fly at his approach, and never spoke of him amongst ourselves, saving in such terms as "au jour crabe" or the Laird Deal. Ronham Manor House, where he lived, was a fine specimen of 16th century architecture, and had it been called a castle, would have merited the appellation far more than many of the buildings in Scotland that bear that name. It was approached by a long avenue of trees, gigantic elms, oaks, and beeches, that, uniting their branches overhead in summertime, formed an effectual barrier to the sun's rays. This avenue had an irresistible attraction for me. It literally swarmed with rabbits and squirrels, and many are the times I have trespassed there to watch them. I had a very secure hiding place in the hollow of an old oak, where I have often been secreted, while Sir E.C. and his keepers, without casting a glance in my direction, passed unsuspectingly by, vowing all sorts of vengeance against trespassers. Of course, I had to be very careful how I got there, for the grounds were well patrolled, and Sir E.C. had sworn to prosecute anyone he caught walking in them without his permission. Had Sir E.C. caught me, I should doubtless have been treated with the utmost severity, since he and my father were the most bitter opponents politically, and for that reason, unreasonable though it may be, never lost an opportunity of insulting one another. My father, a strong radical, was opposed to all big landlord proprietors, and consequently winked his eye at my trespassings. But I think nothing would really have pleased him better than to have seen me brought to book by Sir E.C., since in my defense he would have had an opportunity of appealing to the passions of the local people, who were all radicals, and of incensing them still further against the principles of feudalism. But to continue. I often heard it rumored in the village that Ronham Avenue was haunted, and that the apparition was a lady in white, and no other than Sir E.C.'s wife, whose death at very early age had been hastened, if not entirely accounted for, by her husband's harsh treatment. Whether Sir E.C. was really as black as he was painted, I have never been able to ascertain. The intense animosity which we all regarded him made us believe anything ill of him, and we were quite ready to attribute all the alleged hauntings in the neighborhood to his past misdeeds. I believe my family, with scarcely an exception, believed in ghosts. Anyhow, the subject of ghosts was so often discussed in my hearing that I became possessed of an ungovernable curiosity to see one. If only the White Lady would appear in the daytime, I thought. I thought I should have no difficulty in satisfying this curiosity, but, unfortunately, she did not appear till midnight. In fact, not until long after boys of my age had been ruthlessly ordered off to bed. I did not quite like the idea of stealing out of the house at dead of night and going alone to see the ghost, so I suggested to my schoolfellow that he should also break loose one night and accompany me to Ronham to see the White Lady. It was, however, of no use. Much as he would have liked to have seen the ghost in broad daylight, it was quite another matter at night, to say nothing of running the risk of being caught trespassing by that man, Sir E.C. At length, finding that neither persuasion, bribery, nor taunts of cowardice had any effect on my schoolfellow, who could not decide which appearance would be the more appalling, for he assured me I should be certain to encounter either one or the other, the White Lady or the Laird Deal. I gave up all further effort to induce him to accompany me, and made up my mind to go to the Ronham Avenue alone. Biding my opportunity, and waiting till my father was safely out of the way on a visit to Greenock, where some business transaction would oblige him to remain for some days, I climbed out of my bedroom window, when I deemed the rest of the household to be sound asleep, scudded swiftly across the fields, and, making short work of the lofty wall that formed the southernmost boundary of the Ronham estates, I quickly made my way to the avenue. It was an ideal Sunday night in August, and it seemed as if old nature participated in the Sabbath. Hardly a sound broke the exquisite silence of the woods. At times, overcome with a delightful sensation of freedom, I paused, and raising my eyes to the starry heavens, drank in the huge draughts of the pure country air, tainted only with the sweet smell of newly mown hay and the scent of summer flowers. I became intoxicated, delirious, and in transports of joy threw myself on the soft mossy ground, and, baring my throat and chest, bathed myself in the moonbeams. Kisses. Then, picking myself slowly up, I performed the maddest capers, and finally, sobering down, continued my course. Every now and again, fancying I detected the stealthy footsteps of a keeper. I hid behind a tree, where I remained till I was quite assured I had been mistaken, and that no one was about. How long I dallied I do not know, but it must have been fully 1 o'clock before I arrived at the outskirts of the avenue, and, advancing eagerly, ensconced myself in my favorite sanctuary, the hollow oak. All was hushed, and all was hushed and motionless. And as I gazed into the gloom, I became conscious, for the first time in my life, of a sensation of eeriness. The arched canopy of foliage overhead was strongly suggestive of a funeral pall. Not a glimmer of moonlight penetrated through it, and all beneath seemed to me to be buried in the silence and blackness of the grave. The loneliness got on my nerves at first. I grew afraid, only afraid, and then my fears turned into panic, a wild, mad panic consisting in the one desire to get where there were human beings, creatures I knew and understood. With this end in view, I emerged from my retreat, and was prepping to fly through the wood, when, from a far-off distance, there suddenly came the sound of a voice, the harsh, grating voice of a man. Convinced this time that I had been discovered by a keeper, I jumped back into the tree, and, swarming up the inside of the trunk, peeped cautiously out. What I saw nearly made me jump out of my skin. Advancing alone and along the avenue was the thing I had always longed to see, and for which I had risked so much, the mysterious, far-famed lady in white, a ghost, an actual bona fide ghost. How every nerve in my body thrilled with excitement, and my heart thumped, till it seemed on the verge of bursting through my ribs. The lady in white, why would it be the talk of the whole countryside? Someone had really no hearsay evidence, seen the notorious apparition at last. How all of my schoolfellows would envy me, and how bitterly they would chide themselves for being too cowardly to accompany me. I looked at her closely, and noticed that she was entirely luminous, emitting a strong phosphorescent glow like the glow of a glowworm, saving that it was in a perpetual state of motion. She wore a quantity of white drapery swathed around her in a manner that perplexed me sorely, until I suddenly realized, with a creeping of my flesh, that it must be a winding sheet, that burial accessory so often minutely described to me by the son of the village undertaker. Though interesting, I did not think it at all becoming, and would have preferred to see any other style of garment. Streaming over her neck and shoulders were thick masses of long, wavy golden hair, which was ruffled, but only slightly ruffled, by the gentle summer breeze. Her face, though terrifying by reason of its unearthly pallor, was so beautiful that, had not some restraining influence compelled me to remain in hiding, I would have descended from my perch to obtain a nearer view of it. Indeed, I only once caught a glimpse of her full face, for, with a persistence that was most annoying, she kept it turned from me. But in that brief second, the luster of her long blue eyes won my very soul. And boy, as I felt, like the heroine's song, that I would, for my bonny ghost, in very deed, lay upon Dune and Dee. Her eyes are still firmly impressed on my memory. I shall never forget them, any more than I shall forget the dainty curves of her full red lips, and the snowy whiteness of her perfect teeth. Nothing, I thought, either on the earth or in heaven, could have been half so lovely. And I was so enraptured by what that it was not until she was directly beneath me that I perceived she was not alone, that walking by her side with one arm around her waist, his face and figure illuminated with the light from her body, was Sir E.C. But how changed? Gone were the deep black scowl, the savage tightening of the jaws, and the intensely disagreeable expression that had earned for him the nickname of the Laird Deal. And in their steed I saw love, nothing but blind, infatuated, soul-devouring love, love for which no words can find an adequate description. Throwing discretion to the wind, for my excitement and curiosity had risen to the highest pitch, I now thrust more than half my body out of the hole in the trunk. The next instant, with a cry of dismay, I pitched head first onto the ground. It would seem that boys, like cats, cannot in ordinary circumstances be killed, and instead of breaking my neck, I merely suffered that most immaterial injury, immaterial at least in my case, a temporary disendowment of the senses. On regaining the few wits I could lay claim to, I fully expected to find myself in the hands of the irate Laird, who would seize me by the scruff of the neck and belabor me to pieces. Consequently, too frightened to move, I lay absolutely still with my eyes shut. But as the minutes glided by and nothing happened, I picked myself up. All was quiet and pitch dark. Not a vestige of Lady in White, not a vestige of Sir E.C. It did not take me very long to get out of the wood and home. I ran all the way, and, as it was still early, far too early for any of the household to be astir, I crept up to my bedroom unobserved, but not to sleep. Oh dear me, no, not to sleep. For the moment I blew the candle out and got into bed, reaction set in, and I suffered agonies of fear. When I went to school in the morning, my equilibrium restored, and bubbling over with excitement to tell the boys what had happened, I received another shock. Before I could say a word of my experiences, I was told, with a roar and shout that almost broke the drum of my ears, that the Laird Deal was dead. His body had been found stretched out on the ground, a few feet from the hollow oak in the avenue shortly after sunrise. He had died from syncope, so the doctor said, that had probably been caused by shock, some severe mental shock. I have no idea what syncope is. I did not tell my companion of my night's adventure. After all, my eagerness to do so had departed when I heard of the old lord's death. Cool. Very cool. Okay, let me have another drink here. Another Roman numeral coming right at you. Again, you guys, if you like what you hear and like what you see, please follow, subscribe, follow, double tap that screen, TikTok, double tap that screen. Like I said, I'm trying to go for 1,000 likes. Let's see if we can do this today. Let's do this. Case XVI, the ghost of the Hindu child, or the hauntings of the White Dove Hotel near, St. Swithin's Street, Aberdeen. In the course of many years' investigation of haunted houses, I have naturally come in contact with numerous people who have had first-hand experiences with the occult. Nurse Mackenzie is one of these people. I met her for the first time last year at the house of my old friend, Colonel Malcolmson, whose wife she was nursing. For some days I was hardly aware she was in the house, the illness of her patient keeping her in constant seclusion. But when Mrs. Malcolmson grew better, I not infrequently saw her, taking a morning constitutional in the beautiful castle grounds. It was on one of these occasions that she favored me with an account of her cyclical adventure. It happened, she began, shortly after my term as probationer at St. Kay's Hospital, Edinburgh. A letter was received at the hospital one morning with the urgent request that two nurses should be sent to a serious case near St. Swithin's Street. As the letter was signed by a well-known physician in the town, it received immediate attention, and Nurse Emmett and I were dispatched as day and night nurses respectively to the scene of the action. My hours on duty were from 9 p.m. till 9 a.m. The house in which the patient was located was the White Dove Hotel, a thoroughly respectable and well-managed establishment. The proprietor knew nothing about the invalid, except that her name was Vining. and that she had, at one period of her career, been an actress. He had noticed that she had looked ill on her arrival the previous week. 2 days after her arrival, she had complained of feeling very ill, and the doctor, who had been summoned to attend her, said that she was suffering from a very loathsome Asian disease, which, fortunately, is, in this country, rare. The hotel, though newly decorated and equipped throughout with every up-to-date convenience, was in reality very old. It was one of those delightfully roomy erections that seem built for eternity rather than time, and for the comfort rather than economy of space. The interior, with its oak panel walls, polished oak floors, and low ceilings traversed with ponderous oaken beams, also impressed me pleasantly, whilst a flight of broad oak stairs, fenced with balustrades a foot thick, brought me to a seemingly interminable corridor, into which the door of Miss Vining's room opened. It was a low wainscoted apartment, and its deep-set window, revealing the thickness of the wall, looked out upon a dismal yard littered with brooms and buckets. Opposite the foot of the bed, a modern French bedstead, by the by, whose brass fittings and somewhat flimsy hangings were strangely incongruous with their venerable surroundings, was an ingle, containing the smoldering relics of what had doubtless been intended for a fire, but which needed considerable coaxing before it could be converted from a pretense to a reality. There was no exit save the doorway I had entered, and no furniture save a couple of rush-bottomed chairs and a table strewn with an untidy medley of writing materials and medicine bottles. A feeling of depression, contrasting strangely with the effect produced on me by the cheerfulness of the hotel in general, seized me directly. I entered the room. Despite the brilliancy of the electric light and the new and gaudy bed hangings, the air was full of gloom, a gloom which, for the very reason that it was unaccountable, was the more alarming. I felt it hanging around me like the undeveloped shadow of something singularly hideous and repulsive, and, on my approaching the sick woman, it seemed to thrust itself in my way and force me back. Miss Vining was decidedly good-looking. She had the typically theatrical features, neatly molded nose, and chin curly yellow hair, and big dreamy blue eyes that especially appeal to a certain class of men. Like most women, however, I prefer something more solid, both physically and intellectually. I could not stand the pretty. She was, of course, far too ill to converse, and, beyond a few desultory and spasmodic ejaculations, maintained a rigid silence. As there was no occasion for me to sit close beside her, I drew up a chair before the fire, placing myself in such a position as to command a full view of the bed. Excuse me. My first night passed undisturbed by any incident, and, in the morning, the condition of my patient showed a slight improvement. It was 8 o'clock in the evening when I came on duty again, and, the weather having changed during the day, the whole room echoed and re-echoed with the howling of the wind, which was raging round the house with demoniacal flurry. I had been at my post for a little over 2 hours, and had just registered my patient's temperature, when, happening to look up from the book I was reading, I saw to my surprise that the chair beside the head of the bed was occupied by a child, a tiny girl. How she had come into the room without attracting my attention was certainly extraordinary, and I could only suppose that the shrieking of the wind down the wide chimney had deadened the sound of the door and her footsteps. I was naturally, of course, very indignant that she had dared to come in without rapping, and, getting up from my seat, I was preparing to address her and bid her go, when she lifted a wee white hand and motioned me back. I obeyed, because I could not help myself. Her action was accompanied by a peculiar and unpleasantly peculiar expression that held me spellbound, and, without exactly knowing why, I stood staring at her, tongue-tied and trembling. As her face was turned towards the patient, and she wore, moreover, a very wide-brimmed hat, I could see nothing of her features. But from her graceful little figure and dainty limbs, I gathered that she was probably both beautiful and aristocratic. Her dress, though not perhaps of the richest quality, was certainly far from shoddy, and there was something in its style and make that suggested foreign nationality, maybe Italy or Spain or South America, or even the Orient, the probability of the latter being strengthened by her pose, which was full of the serpent-like ease which is characteristic of the East. I was so taken up with watching her that I forgot all about my patient, until a prolonged sigh from the bed reminded me of her existence. With an effort, I then advanced and was about to approach the bed, when the child, without moving her head, motioned me back, and again I was helpless. The vision I had obtained of the sick woman, brief though it was, filled me with alarm. She was tossing to and fro on the blankets, and breathing in the most agonized manner, as if in delirium, or enthralled by some particularly dreadful nightmare. Her condition so frightened me that I made the most frantic efforts to overcome my inertia. I did not succeed, however, and at last, utterly overcome by my exertion, I closed my eyes. When I opened them, again the chair by the bed was vacant. The child had gone. A tremendous feeling of relief surged through me, and, jumping out of my seat, I hastened to the bedside. My patient was worse. The fever had increased, and she was delirious. I took her temperature. It was 104. I now sat close beside her, and my presence apparently had a soothing effect. She quickly grew calmer, and after taking her medicine, gradually sank into a gentle sleep, which lasted until late in the morning. When I left her, she had altogether recovered from the relapse. I, of course, told the doctor of the child's visit, and he was very angry. "Whatever happens, nurse," he said, "take care that no one enters that room tonight. The patient's condition is far too critical for her to see anyone, even her own daughter. You must keep the door locked." Armed with this mandate, I went on duty the following night with a somewhat lighter heart, and, after locking the door, once again sat by the fire. During the day there had been a heavy fall of snow, the wind had abated, and the streets were now as silent as the grave. 10, 11, 12, the clock struck, and my patient slept tranquilly. At 1:45, however, I was abruptly roused from a reverie by a sob of fear and agony that proceeded from the bed. I looked, and there, seated in the same posture as on the previous evening, was the child. I sprang to my feet with an exclamation of amazement. She raised her hand, and as before, I collapsed, spellbound, paralyzed. No words of mine can convey all the sensations I experienced as I sat there, forced to listen to the moaning and groaning of the woman whose fate had been entrusted to my keeping. Every second she grew worse, and each sound rang in my ears like the hammering of nails in her coffin. How long had I endured such torment, I cannot say. I dare not think, for, though the clock was within a few feet of me, I never once thought of looking at it. At last the child rose, and, moving slowly from the bed, advanced with bowed head towards the window. The spell was broken. With a cry of indignation, I literally bounded over the carpet and faced the intruder. "Who are you?" I hissed. "Tell me your name instantly. How dare you enter this room without my permission?" As I spoke, she slowly raised her head. I snatched at her hat. It melted away in my hands, and, to my unspeakable terror, my undying terror, I looked into the face of a corpse. The corpse of a Hindu child, with a big gaping cut. With a big gaping cut. In its lifetime, the child had, without doubt, been lovely. It was now horrible with all the ghastly disfigurements. I fainted, and, on recovering, found my ghostly visitor had vanished, and that my patient was dead. One of her hands was thrown across her eyes, as if to shut out some object on which she feared to look, whilst the other grasped at the counterpane convulsively. It fell to my duty to help pack up her belongings, and, among the letters, was a large envelope bearing the postmark of Quetta. as we were on the lookout for some sort of clue as to the address of her relatives. I opened it. It was merely the cabinet-sized photograph of a Hindu child. But I recognized the dress immediately. It was that of my ghostly visitor. On the back of it were these words, Natalie, may God forgive us both. Though we made careful inquiries for any information as to Natalie and Miss Vining in Canada, and advertised freely in the leading London papers, we learned nothing, and in time we were forced to let the matter drop. As far as I know, the ghost of the Hindu child has never been seen again, but I have heard that the hotel is still haunted by a woman. All right, that's it for this week. Let me shut this off real quick. That's it for this week. We will continue next week, and next week, probably halfway through, we'll be starting the werewolf book. We'll be starting a totally new book. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, we're back on track for California Haunts Radio and some spooky stuff. And we are going to have Britt Elders to join us, and she's going to be talking about the Billy Mayer UFO case. So that's tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, California Haunts Radio. For you guys over on TikTok, that's youtube.com/@California Haunts Radio. And we do it every night, Thursday through Friday. Okay, another quick announcement is I should have more information up later on tonight, about our watch party. We're going to be watching, I want to set up a Creature Features watch party. Creature Features is on YouTube every Friday night, 8 p.m. Pacific, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to just have a get-together where we could all, everybody who watched the show, we can all get together and watch Creature Features at the same time and chit-chat about it and whatnot. So I'm putting that together for you guys, so I should have all that information ready tomorrow or tonight or early tomorrow. So that would be really cool. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I realize it's Mother's Day in the United States. It's also Sunday for some people, get ready for work and that and such. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody on TikTok that came and listened. I really appreciate it. If you could double tap that screen for me and leave me some happy, some likes, I would really appreciate it. I'm trying to build everything up. I'll be doing a lot more on TikTok coming up here, some impromptu stuff like this. As we are a working paranormal team, paranormal investigation team, I'm going to have ghost stories and stuff from around California and the United States. I'm also going to be doing equipment checks and things like that, showing you evidence that we get on certain cases. I'll even be going live from certain locations that we investigate. Okay? Anyway, I want to thank you all, and I do appreciate you coming, and please be on the lookout for the party. The links for the party, the viewing party that we're going to do, viewing party. But thank you, TikTok, and please feel free, if you like what you saw tonight, double tap that screen, share it, tell people about us. Like I said, I read the book every Sunday, so I read for about an hour every Sunday out of a paranormal themed book. It may be true ghost stories, it may not be, but it just depends on the book. All right. Well, thanks a lot, TikTok. I will see you next week. Have a great day. Just got the button. There we go. Okay, so we're back. Guys, again, I will see you guys tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. I appreciate you all coming. Thank you for the like. Who was the like? Thank you, Marisa, for the like. Let me get down here. And like I said, I appreciate each and every one of you. And thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the book read today. I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with Britt Elders and the Billy Mayer UFO case. Have a great night, guys.